Every morning of my life begins the same way, with the quiet creaking creak of the floorboards on the second floor of the old house on Cherry Lane. 67 years on, and I still wake up before the alarm clock rings. An old habit acquired over decades of living with Howard. My husband has always been an early bird, and in 38 years of marriage, I've learned to adjust to his regimen. My name is Ruth Bramble, a widow, a mother, a part-time tax consultant in a small town called Waukee, where everyone knows everyone else, and it seems that all my secrets have long since become public. Not that a woman my age has any secrets anymore. I slowly descend the stairs, holding onto the banister. Despite my efforts, the slight pain in my knee still makes itself felt. I've been thinking more and more lately that this house is getting too big for me alone. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen. The space where a whole family used to live now feels as empty as a faded photograph. In the kitchen, I turn on the kettle and look out the window at my small, manicured garden. Howard used to love working there on weekends. Now I hire Earl Peabody once a month to trim the bushes and mow the lawn. It's been 5 years since a heart attack took my husband, but I still make it a habit to make 2 cups of tea every morning before I catch myself. The morning ritual helps me gather my thoughts before a new day. Today is Tuesday, one of the 3 days a week that I work at Randall's Tax. I finish my tea and get dressed, a navy blue skirt, a white blouse, the pearl earrings Howard gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. Nothing fancy, but neat and professional. Before I leave the house, I check my phone as a habit. No calls or texts from Lewis. My only son, 39 years old, lives only 15 minutes away from me, but sometimes it feels like thousands of miles separating us. We were once close. As a child, Lewis was more attached to me than to his father. Howard often stayed late at work, trying to make a decent living, and I spent every spare minute with my son. We did puzzles together, read books, baked cookies on the weekends. But as I got older, something changed. Gradually, year after year, a wall has grown between us that I can't break through no matter how hard I try. The door closes behind me with a quiet click. I get into my old Ford, which has served me well for over a decade. Lewis keeps hinting that I should get a new car, but this one does a good job of getting me from A to B. The Randall Tax Bureau office is in the heart of downtown Waukee in a small 2-story building on Main Street. On the first floor is Millie's coffee shop, where the local gossip columnists gather, and on the second floor is our bureau, barber shop, and insurance agent's office. Good morning, Ruth. Eleanor Higgins, our secretary, greets me with an unfailing smile. She's in her mid-30s, a single mom with 2 kids, and I sometimes see the same tiredness in her eyes that I see in mine when I look in the mirror. Minus Mr. Randall's been asking about you. Is it something urgent? I ask, taking off my coat. No, I just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten about the Tomlinson couple. They'll be here at 11. I nod. Of course I haven't forgotten. In 15 years of working in this office, I've never forgotten a client. James Randall knows this, but he still checks in periodically, as if I'm slipping into senile dementia and about to forget my name. My desk is the farthest from the entrance, by the window overlooking the square. I like to watch the life of the city when I take a break between filling out tax returns. It's peaceful. The Tomlinson couple come in at 11 sharp. They're middle-aged, they own a bakery on the outskirts of Waukee, and every year their tax returns get more complicated as the business grows. Mrs. Bramble, Lauren Tomlinson says, shaking my hand, how nice to see you again. We brought you a blueberry pie fresh out of the oven. They always bring something from their bakery. Probably think it'll help them get more tax deductions. I never say no. It would be rude, and their pies are really good. Customer service takes up all my attention until lunchtime. When the clock strikes 1 o'clock, I head to Millie's for a sandwich and a cup of coffee. There I meet Hazel Ford, my longtime friend and retired school teacher. Ruth, she exclaims when she sees me. I was just thinking about you. Have a seat. Hazel is one of the few people in my life who really listens, not just pretends. We've been friends since Lewis and her daughter Abigail were in the same grade in elementary school. How is your son doing? She asks, stirring the sugar in her tea. Did you hear there's a wedding coming up? I nod, trying to hide the mixed feelings that question evokes in me. In 2 months? June 28th. And how do you like your future daughter-in-law? Pearl, I think? At the mention of Pearl Whitmore's name, something clenches in my chest. I met her almost a year ago when Lewis finally decided to introduce us to each other after 6 months. It was unexpected, I answer evasively. Actually, that first meeting left a very unpleasant impression on me. We were having lunch at the Green Oak restaurant on the outskirts of Waukee. Lewis was late, and Pearl and I were alone at the table for a good 20 minutes. So you're a tax consultant? She asked, eyeing me with an appraising look. That must be so predictable. Her tone, full of implicit superiority, made me realize that I was dealing with someone who looked down on me. Maybe, I answered then. But it brings in a steady income and allows me to help people. Pearl works for an advertising agency in a neighboring larger city. In those 20 minutes, I learned more about the advertising campaigns she ran than I would have wanted to know in a lifetime. When Lewis finally appeared, his eyes darted between us, as if he was afraid we might have said something irreparable to each other. Pearl was transformed at once, the embodiment of charm and warmth. Her hand rested on my son's shoulder in a gesture that was both tender and possessive. "Oh, darling, your mother was telling me about her work. It's so interesting," she exclaimed with a fake enthusiasm that didn't fool me for a second. Throughout the lunch, I felt superfluous. They exchanged glances and jokes that only the two of them could understand. And even when Lewis tried to engage me in conversation, Pearl skillfully took the lead. "Remember that thing with Jason and his presentation?" she said, laughing and touching Lewis's arm. "You have to tell your mom." And my son, whom I had once known better than anyone in the world, drifted away from me with every phrase, every gesture of his bride-to-be. "Ruth?" Hazel's voice brings me back to reality. "You look worried." "I'm fine," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Just a lot on my mind." "About the wedding?" "Not only that, I'm thinking about the ancestral home. You know, the one my parents left me on Elm Street." Hazel nods. She knows the history of that house. My parents bought it before I was born. It's a 2-story Victorian mansion with a veranda and a big garden. I grew up in it, but after I got married, Howard and I decided to buy our own house, the one I live in now. My parents' house has been empty since my mother moved into a nursing home 10 years ago, and I inherited it when she died. I keep the house in good condition, pay all the utilities, and visit occasionally to air it out and make sure everything is in order. "I'm thinking of giving it to Lewis and Pearl," I say finally. "As a wedding present." Hazel's eyebrows rise in surprise. That's very generous of you, Ruth. But are you sure? This house is part of your heritage, your history." I sigh, stirring sugar into my coffee. History is good, but the house is too big to just stand empty. Lewis and Pearl are renting an apartment right now. They could use their own place, especially if they're planning kids. Are they? I don't know, I admit. Lewis hasn't shared that kind of thing with me much lately. Since Howard's death, our relationship with our son has been strained. He's called less often, his visits have dwindled to mandatory holidays, and conversations have become superficial exchanges of pleasantries. I can't figure out when or why this rift occurred, but every time I try to shorten the distance, I feel Lewis pull further away. Maybe this gift will help mend the relationship, I wonder out loud. Hazel looks at me questioningly. Or make it seem like you're trying to buy his attention. "Ruth, darling, I know how much you miss being close to your son, but a big house is a big responsibility. Are you sure that's what they want?" I didn't ask, I confess. I wanted it to be a surprise. "A surprise in the form of a house?" Hazel shakes her head. "Maybe we should find out what their plans are first. Maybe she's right. But part of me fears that if I reveal my intentions in advance, Lewis will find a polite way to decline. Or worse, accept the gift with cold gratitude, as if it were his right, not my choice." We finished lunch, discussing other mutual acquaintances and the latest city news. Walking back to the office, I think about the ancestral home. Over the years, it has become something of a repository of memories for me. Sometimes I go there and just sit in the living room, imagining my mother cooking in the kitchen and my father reading the newspaper in his favorite chair. To give this house to Lewis is to give away a part of myself, a part of my history. But maybe that's what we need to do to move on, to let new memories fill these old walls. After work, I decide to stop by the Heritage House. It stands on a quiet Elm Street surrounded by tall trees. Parking in front of it, I spend some time just looking at its facade. White walls, dark green shutters, a wide porch with a railing. This house remembers me as a child, a teenager, a young bride. It holds the echoes of my parents' voices, the laughter of my school friends, the quiet conversations with my first love on that very veranda. Inside, everything remains as it was when my mother was alive. The furniture is covered with sheets to keep out the dust, but if you take them off, you can see the same couch I fell asleep on as a child, the same dining table where our family gathered every evening. I walk slowly through the rooms, touching the walls, the doorways. I imagine how Louis and Pearl might live here, how children's laughter might fill these empty spaces again. But would they be able to appreciate the history of this place? Or will it be just another house for them, which they will eventually sell to buy something more modern and stylish? Returning home, I decide I'm going to gift them the house after all. Not because I hope to buy their love or attention, but because it's the right thing to do. Houses should live on, not stand as empty monuments to the past. In the evening, Louis calls me out of the blue. "Mommy, are you busy?" His voice sounds tense, and I'm immediately alarmed. "No, darling, is something wrong?" "It's nothing. It's just, Pearl wanted to talk to you about some wedding details. Can we stop by your place tomorrow night?" I feel my heart quicken with sudden joy. Finally, they want to include me in the wedding preparations. "Of course, I'll cook dinner. Would 6 o'clock suit you?" "Yes, fine," Louis answers, and I think I can hear the relief in his voice. "See you tomorrow, Mom." As I hang up the phone, I can't help but smile. Maybe things are getting better. Perhaps my gift will be gratefully accepted and become a bridge connecting us again. I fall asleep with the thought that tomorrow night could be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship with our son. And for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. By 6 p.m., I've turned my kitchen into a little feast. Baked chicken with rosemary and garlic, potato gratin, fresh salad, and apple pie for dessert, all Louis's favorites from childhood. As I set the table, I caught myself cooking with the same excitement I once did for special family dinners when Howard returned from business trips. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Punctuality is the only trait my son inherited from his father. "Good evening, Mom." Louis hugged me awkwardly, patting me on the back as if we were distant acquaintances meeting at a corporate event. "Hello, Mrs. Bramble." Pearl stood behind him, wearing an impeccably fitting burgundy dress and an expression that might have been friendly if it weren't for the coldness in her eyes. "Come in, come in." I stepped aside to let them into the house. "Dinner's almost ready." "Wow, that's a lot of stuff." Louis glanced around the table. "You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble, Mom." "It's not a chore, dear. I'm glad you came by." We sat down at the table, and I poured the wine into glasses. The conversation flowed slowly, punctuated by awkward pauses. Louis talked about his work at the construction company. Pearl made comments about her advertising projects, and I listened intently, trying to find the right moment to ask about the wedding. So, I finally decided when the first course had been eaten. "You wanted to discuss the details of the wedding?" Louis and Pearl exchanged quick glances. Something elusive flashed between them, some signal that only the two of them understood. "Yes." Pearl straightened in her chair. "Louis and I have been thinking about how you might be able to help." "Of course I'd love to!" I exclaimed too hastily and regretted it when I saw the slight grin that flickered across my future daughter-in-law's lips. "We thought you might do the seating," Pearl said in the way one speaks to an elderly aunt who needs a simple task to make her feel needed. "Nothing complicated, just arrange the name cards on the tables according to a plan I'll prepare." "And Mom," Louis added, not meeting my gaze, "it would be great if you could help with the transportation of the gifts after the ceremony." I felt something settle inside. Seating the guests and transporting the gifts. That's as much involvement as they're willing to allow me. "What about the preparations?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "I could help with the flowers, the menu." "Oh, that's already taken care of." Pearl smiled her trademark smile that didn't affect her eyes. "My mom and I have it all planned out. We've chosen peonies and white roses, and the menu has been coordinated with the chef at the Silver Horseshoe. You know what a great chef they have, right? He cooked for the governor last year." I nodded, fighting my disappointment. The Silver Horseshoe is the most expensive restaurant around, and Pearl knew I preferred to cook at home. It was just another way of telling me that my cooking skills weren't good enough for their special day. I see. I poured myself some more wine. What about the dress? Have you picked one out yet? Sure. Pearl's eyes lit up. It's by Vera Wang, and it's stunning. Hand embroidery, flowing silk. Sounds gorgeous, I smiled. I wish I could see it. You'll see it at the wedding, Mrs. Bramble, Pearl said. I'm superstitious about such things. I swallowed the comment about how it was usually the groom who was superstitious, not the mother of the bride. However, technically, I'm not even the mother of the bride. Dinner continued in the same vein. Every time I tried to offer my help or share an idea, Pearl made it delicately but firmly clear that everything had already been decided without me. Louis was mostly silent, occasionally nodding to his fiancée and avoiding my gaze. When I brought the apple pie, Pearl had barely touched her portion. I'm afraid I need to watch my figure before the wedding, she explained with a hint that I didn't understand. I can give you a recipe for a diet version, I offered. I'd made one for Howard once when his doctor told him to watch his weight. No, thank you. Pearl pushed her plate away. I have a personal nutritionist. Of course she has a personal nutritionist. And probably a personal trainer, stylist, and God knows who else. All to emphasize the distance between us. The simple small-town tax consultant and the shiny urban advertising specialist. After dinner, Louis helped me clear the table while Pearl answered messages on her phone. In the kitchen, finally alone with my son, I decided to talk about the house. Louis, there's something I wanted to talk to you about, I began, rinsing the plates. Yes, Mom? He seemed distracted, glancing toward the living room where Pearl was sitting. I was thinking about a wedding present for you, I continued. Something special. It doesn't have to be anything special, he answered quickly. We've compiled a list of gifts from Bloomingdale's department store. Pearl will send you the link. No, I mean something more substantial. I wiped my hands and turned to him. I was thinking of giving you the house on Elm Street, the one I got from my grandparents. Louis froze, eyes wide. That Victorian mansion? Really? I nodded, trying to read the expression on his face. Surprise? Joy? Calculation? It's been standing empty for too long. It's a nice house with history, the perfect place to start a family. Louis lowered his eyes, and I noticed his fingers tapping nervously on the tabletop, a habit from childhood when he was worried or hiding something. That's very generous, Mom. But are you sure? I mean, it's your inheritance. Which will be yours now, I smiled. I've already started the paperwork. I was going to surprise you after the wedding, but maybe you'd like to plan ahead, like renovations or something. I'll have to discuss it with Pearl, Louis interrupted me. Thank you, Mom. This is very sudden. There wasn't the joy in his voice that I'd hoped for. Rather, I heard confusion and anxiety. Before I could ask what was wrong, he added, Just don't tell Pearl yet, okay? I'll tell her myself when the time is right. That surprised me. Why wouldn't he want me to tell her about the gift? Wouldn't it be better to discuss it together, the three of us? Sure, whatever you say, I agreed, feeling slightly disappointed. We went back to the living room where Pearl stood up when she saw us. We should go, dear. We have to get up early tomorrow. Yes, of course, Louis nodded, visibly relieved. Thanks for dinner, Mom. You're welcome. I walked them to the door. Let me know if you need any help with the wedding preparations. I will, Pearl replied with the same fake smile. And don't forget to try on the dress we've picked out for you. I'll send you the address of the atelier. Only when the door closed behind them did I realize that they hadn't even asked my opinion about the dress I was to wear. Like everything else, the decision had been made without me. The following weeks turned into a strange game of trying to participate in the wedding preparations, while Louis and Pearl ingeniously kept me at a distance. Trying on the dress was a nightmare. Pearl had chosen a dull beige suit that made me look like a blur. When I cautiously suggested a brighter color, the owner of the studio, obviously instructed in advance, said that the bride insisted on that shade so that everything would harmonize in the photos. I complied, though inside I was seething with indignation. Was Pearl afraid that a 67-year-old woman in a blue or purple dress would outshine her on her wedding day? The question of the ancestral home hung in the air. Louis had not mentioned it since our conversation, and I hesitated to ask for fear of seeming intrusive. Nevertheless, I went ahead with the paperwork, contacting the notary, and preparing all the necessary papers. If they accepted my gift, everything would be ready for transfer right after the wedding. One day, I decided to visit the house to see if everything was in order and maybe start a little cleaning. I wanted the house to look as attractive as possible by the time Louis and Pearl saw it. As I approached Elm Street, I noticed a familiar car parked outside the house, Louis's dark blue Audi. My heart jumped. Had he told Pearl about the gift after all, and they'd decided to look at the house? I parked a little farther down the street and wondered for a moment if I should join them. Perhaps they wanted to tour the house alone, without my interference. On the other hand, who better than I could tell them about the history of the place, about its peculiarities? After some hesitation, I decided to approach. If they wanted to be alone, I would just give them the keys and leave. I walked quietly toward the house and was about to ring the doorbell when I heard voices coming through the open living room window. Louis and Pearl obviously didn't expect anyone to hear them. "Old and uncomfortable," Pearl said with obvious irritation in her voice. "It smells musty in here, Louis. And do you have any idea how much it's going to cost to fix it? It's a money pit." "I know, honey." My son's voice sounded tired. "But it's a very generous gesture on her part. And the house is in a good neighborhood. The land here is expensive." "So let's sell it as soon as we get it," Pearl exclaimed. "We'll invest the money in an apartment in the city like we planned. I'm not going to live in this crypt, surrounded by the ghosts of your mother's past." I froze, leaning against the wall of the house. They want to sell it, without even trying to live here, without even appreciating its beauty and history. "I don't know, Pearl." I could hear the doubt in Louis's voice. "It might hurt her feelings." "Oh dear, this talk of your mother's feelings again." Pearl didn't hide her irritation. "Don't you think too much about how she feels? We're starting a life, Louis. A new life, without always looking back at your mommy." There was a pause, and I held my breath, waiting to see what my son would say. Would he defend me? Would he tell me I was important to him? "You're right," he finally said quietly. "We have to think about our future." I covered my mouth with my hand so I wouldn't let out an involuntary sigh. It was painful to hear my own child say that. "Exactly." Pearl's voice softened, almost purring. "And let's be honest, your mother isn't the nicest person in the world. She's always looking at me with that appraising look of hers, as if I'm not good enough for her precious son." "Pearl." "No, seriously." She wouldn't stop. "We both know she doesn't approve of me. Remember how she used to comment on my work? 'Oh, advertising, how interesting. And what exactly do you do all day?' Like I'm some slacker who just shifts papers around." I never said anything like that. My comment was genuine interest, an attempt to learn more about her work. But apparently, Pearl chose to interpret it in her own way. "And her endless stories about what you were like as a child," Pearl continued. "It's so tiresome. No one wants to hear for the 100th time how little Louis learned to ride a bicycle." Louis grinned, and the laugh sounded like a betrayal to me. "Yes, she can be a little obsessive." "Obsessive?" Pearl snorted. "That's an understatement. You know, I'm starting to wonder if I should even invite her to the wedding." My heart skipped a beat. Not inviting a mother to her only son's wedding? It was so absurd that I almost laughed in shock. "Pearl, we can't not invite my mother," Louis argued, but his voice didn't have the firmness I'd hoped to hear. "Why not?" Pearl asked. "The budget is tight, and we've already cut the guest list, and your mother will only spoil the atmosphere with her long faces and inappropriate comments. People will ask where she is. Say she's sick, or that she didn't want to come," Pearl suggested. "Frankly, I'd feel a lot more comfortable if I didn't have to think about her watching us with her judgmental gaze all the time." There was a long pause. I waited for Louis to speak forcefully in my defense, to tell me that that option wasn't even on the table. But instead, I heard his quiet, uncertain voice. "I'll think about it." "Think about it?" Pearl sounded surprised but pleased. "Are you really considering it?" "I don't know, Pearl." Louis's voice was struggling internally. "It was my mother after all. Who suffocated you with her custody?" Pearl finished for him. "You said yourself that she always made you feel guilty if you didn't live up to her expectations. Isn't it time you were free of that?" "I've never done anything like that." Always supported Lewis's every endeavor, even when he dropped out of college after his first year, even when he changed 3 jobs in 2 years. I was always on his side. Where did this warped version of me come from in his head? Yeah, you're probably right, Lewis said after a pause. Maybe it's best for everyone. That's wonderful, Pearl said, clearly pleased. I'll talk to the organizer, and we'll adjust the guest list. Don't worry, darling, it'll be a perfect day, our day. I heard the sound of a kiss and then footsteps approaching the door. Quickly backing away, I hid behind a large lilac bush growing in front of the house. My heart was racing and only one thought was pounding in my head. My son doesn't want to see me at his wedding. My only child is ready to cut me out of the most important day of his life. Lewis and Pearl walked out of the house, still talking quietly about something. Pearl was laughing, resting her head on his shoulder, and he had his arm around her waist. They looked perfectly happy and content with their decision. It wasn't until their car rounded the corner that I came out of my hiding place. My legs could barely hold me up, and I sank down on the veranda steps, trying to comprehend what I had just heard. They're going to take my gift a house full of memories and history and sell it at the first opportunity. And they don't want me at the wedding. In me, the mother who gave her whole life for her son, who always put his interests before her own. At that moment, something broke inside me. Not my heart. It had been broken many times before. It was the part of me that still believed that patience and love could overcome any distance, could melt any ice. I now realized that sometimes bridges really do burn, and there is no turning back. I looked at my parents' house, the place where I was once happy, and decided that it wasn't going to go to people who couldn't appreciate its history and significance. This house deserved better. And so did I. After I overheard Lewis and Pearl talking in the Heritage House, a week passed, a week of agonizing reflection and sleepless nights. I waited for Lewis to call me and tell me his decision, and at the same time, I dreaded that call. Part of me still hoped that he would change his mind, that common sense would prevail, and he would realize how absurd the idea of not inviting his mother to his own wedding was. On Wednesday night, as I sat in the living room with a book I couldn't bring myself to read, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Lewis stood on the doorstep with a look on his face that I remembered from his childhood, a mixture of guilt, determination, and fear, just like when he broke my mother's favorite vase and came to confess. "Hi, Mom," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Can I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We went into the living room and I offered him tea, more out of habit than out of a desire to show him hospitality. "No, thank you," he declined, sitting down on the edge of the couch, as if ready to jump up and run away at any moment. "I won't be long. I just wanted to talk about something." I sat down in the chair across from him, hands folded in my lap. I looked calm on the outside, but inside I was clenching with the anticipation of the inevitable blow. "I'm listening," I said in a steady voice. Lewis took a deep breath as if he were jumping into cold water. "Mom, it's about the wedding," he began, carefully avoiding my gaze. "Pearl and I have been discussing it for a long time and, well, we're on a very tight budget, and we've decided to keep it very private, just our closest friends and I'm not one of them," I finished for him when he stammered. Lewis finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with surprise. Maybe he'd been expecting tears, yelling, accusations, anything but this calm acceptance. "It's not that, Mom," he hastened to assure me. "It's just that we want this day to be special, without too much tension and stress?" I raised an eyebrow. "And you think I'm the source of that tension?" Lewis crinkled his nose like a toothache. "No, not exactly. It's just that you and Pearl have different views on a lot of things, and we thought it might be best if you didn't come, to avoid any possible, misunderstandings." I looked at my son and saw not a grown man of 39, but a frightened boy repeating memorized phrases, afraid to forget a word. The words weren't his, they were Pearl's. I could feel it in the intonation, the choice of expression, the unnatural hardness in his usually soft voice. "I understand," I said after a pause. "You've come to tell me that I'm not invited to your wedding." Lewis flinched at this bluntness. "Mother, don't say that, it sounds awful." "What's it supposed to sound like, Lewis?" I asked calmly. Do you want me to come up with some convenient wording myself? How about saying that I voluntarily refused to come so I wouldn't spoil your party? He looked at me with sudden confusion, as if he was only now realizing the full extent of what he was doing. I just want you to understand that it's not because I don't love you or anything like that. It's just that sometimes you have to make choices and you did. I nodded. It's okay, Louis. I accept your decision. He stared at me incredulously. You do? You're not mad? I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd been putting on for the last few years when I'd spoken to him, but a genuine one. Because in that moment, I actually felt strangely relieved. No more pretending that everything was okay, that our relationship could work out, that I was still important to him. The truth had finally come out loud, and it brought an unexpected release. No, I'm not mad, I replied. I'm grateful for your honesty. Louis clearly hadn't expected that reaction. He'd come prepared for scandal, for emotional blackmail, for tears and recriminations, all the things Pearl had probably predicted. But my calmness had thrown him off balance. Really? He asked uncertainly. You're not upset? I stood up from my chair, signaling that the conversation was over. Louis, I'm your mother. Of course it hurts that I won't get to see my only son get married, but I respect your choice, whatever it is. And if it's important to you that I not be at your wedding, I won't insist. He stood up too, clearly unsure of what to say next. This conversation wasn't going the way he'd probably rehearsed it all the way to my house. Thank you for understanding, Mom, he finally said. It means a lot to me. I nodded and headed for the door, signaling that our conversation was over. Louis turned around awkwardly at the door. By the way, about that house, he started. Don't worry about it, I interrupted him gently. We'll discuss it later. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but changed his mind. Nodding, he walked quickly down the steps and got into the car. I stood in the doorway watching him drive away, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. Closing the door, I walked to my office and pulled out a folder with the deeds to the inherited house. Everything was ready to be transferred. All that was left was to be signed and notarized. Instead, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number of Oliver Pratt, my attorney. Oliver, it's Ruth Bramble. Sorry to call you so late, but there's been a change of plans for the house on Elm Street. I want to cancel the deed of gift. The next morning, I met with Oliver at his office, and we canceled all the documents prepared to transfer the house to Louis. Instead, I asked him to prepare the paperwork for a possible future sale of the house. Are you sure, Ruth? Oliver asked, looking at me over his glasses. That's a rather abrupt change of heart. I'm absolutely sure, I answered. Sometimes circumstances change and we have to change plans. He didn't ask further, which I was grateful for. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange daze. I went to work, socialized with clients, met Hazel for coffee, all the usual. But inside me, something was different. It was as if after a long illness a breakthrough had come, and now the slow but sure process of recovery was beginning. I no longer checked my phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a call from Louis. No more making up reasons to call him myself. I didn't agonize over what I'd done wrong or how to fix it. Instead, I started thinking about myself, for the first time in a very long time. The day of Louis and Pearl's wedding, June 28th, was surprisingly sunny and warm. I deliberately did not plan anything for that day, for fear that I might become melancholy. Instead, I decided to go to a neighboring town to visit a small art gallery I'd heard about, but hadn't had time to visit. In the morning, however, just as I was about to leave the house, the phone rang. The number was unidentified, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Hello? Mrs. Bramble? The unfamiliar female voice sounded uncertain. This is Lydia Holt, your son's wedding planner. I froze with my keys in my hand. Yes, that's me. What can I do for you? I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a little problem, Lydia said quickly. Louis mentioned that you'd agreed to help with seating, but no one showed up to do it. The ceremony is in 3 hours, and the cards still haven't been placed. I couldn't believe my ears. After everything that had happened, after Louis himself had told me I wasn't invited, he still expected me to help organize his wedding. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, I said, trying to speak calmly. Louis had informed me that my presence at the wedding was inadvisable. so I can't help with seating or anything else." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know." Lydia was clearly confused. "This is unexpected. I'll contact the fiancé and clarify the situation. Have a good day." I ended the call, feeling my hands shaking. That was the last straw. Even after taking me off the guest list, Louis still took it for granted that I would run errands for his wedding. It was as if I wasn't a mother, but a hired help who could be summoned at a moment's notice as needed. I canceled my trip to the gallery. Instead, I spent all day at home sorting through old photo albums and letters. It was a kind of ritual of saying goodbye not to Louis, but to the version of myself that still clung to illusions about our relationship. I found photos of Louis at different ages, smiling a toothless smile on his 5th birthday, serious in his graduation suit, proud with his first car. Many of the pictures were of us together, hugging, laughing, posing in front of landmarks on our rare trips together. Looking at these images, I tried to understand when exactly the breakup occurred, when love and intimacy were replaced by cold politeness and alienation. Could it have started after Howard's death? Or earlier, when Louis first left for college and came back a different person with new friends and views? Or maybe the seeds of discord had been planted in his childhood, and I just hadn't noticed them, consumed with taking care of my husband and the house. At some point, I realized that it didn't matter. You can't change the past. You can only accept it and move on. By evening, I had collected all the photos and letters and put them away in a box that I took to the attic. I didn't throw them away. I wasn't ready for such a drastic step, but I put them out of sight so they wouldn't weigh on my mind every time I passed a bookshelf. At 9 o'clock that evening, when the wedding party was supposed to be in full swing, my phone rang again. This time it was Hazel's number. "Ruth?" My friend's voice sounded worried. "Are you all right?" "Quite," I answered, surprised at her tone. "Why?" "I just got back from Louis's wedding," Hazel said. "I was shocked not to see you there. When I asked about you, Pearl said you were ill and couldn't come. But I felt something was wrong. What's going on, Ruth?" I sighed. Surely they'd come up with a convenient explanation for my absence. They couldn't be telling the truth, that they had deliberately not invited the groom's mother to the wedding. "Louis informed me 2 weeks ago that I wasn't invited to the wedding," I said bluntly. "Something about a limited budget and wanting to see only close people." "What?" Hazel's indignation was so genuine that I smiled. "There must be some mistake, Ruth. There were at least 100 people there, including all of Pearl's colleagues whom she hardly seems to know." "It's not a mistake, Hazel," I said calmly, though the dull ache in my chest began to grow again. "It was their choice and I accepted it. But it's just—" Hazel seemed unable to find the words. "How could Louis do this? You're his mother, for God's sake." "Apparently it matters less than we used to think," I replied with a bitter chuckle. We talked some more. Hazel talked about the wedding, about the overly fancy floral arrangements, about Pearl's dress, which she thought would be more appropriate for the red carpet than for a small town wedding, about the awkward toasts and the strained smiles of the guests, many of whom, it turned out, had noticed my absence and were asking about it. "You know what the most ironic thing is?" Hazel said before we said goodbye. "They announced that they had bought a house. The heirloom one, on Elm Street. Louis said it was their family nest, where they planned to raise their children and grow old together." I felt a cold rage rising in me. Not only had they excluded me from the most important event in my son's life, but they had also lied about my gift, presenting the house as their own purchase. "Thank you for calling, Hazel," I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. "I appreciate your concern." After talking to Hazel, I couldn't sleep. I paced around the house, going over everything I'd learned in my head and feeling the resolve building up inside. It was no longer a matter of resentment or frustration. It was a matter of justice and self-respect. In the morning, when I finally dozed off in my chair, I was awakened by the doorbell. Louis stood on the doorstep, dressed in casual clothes, but with the remnants of holiday glamour, neatly styled hair, an expensive watch on his wrist. "Hi, Mom," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "May I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We went into the living room, and this time I didn't offer him tea or coffee. I just sat down and looked at him expectantly. Louis cleared his throat nervously. Yesterday was the wedding, he began, as if I might not know it. Congratulations, I said without much warmth in my voice. I hope it went well. Yeah, it was. Wonderful, he stammered, obviously trying to find the right words. Look, Mom, I wanted to apologize for the way things turned out. With the invitation and everything, it was wrong. I was silent, waiting for it to continue. Louis swallowed and continued. And I also found out something yesterday, from James Randall. He said you were going to give us a house on Elm Street. Is that true? Oh, here's the thing. My boss, who knew about my plans, apparently mentioned it at the wedding, congratulating the newlyweds on getting a new house. And now Louis came running to me to see if he'd missed a favorable gift. Yes, that's true, I replied calmly. I was planning to give you the house as a gift, but then you informed me that I wasn't invited to the wedding, and I decided there was no point. Louis turned pale. Mom, I didn't know. If I had known about the house, I would never have. Wouldn't have taken me off the guest list? I finished for him. So you're willing to tolerate my presence if I give you the house? No, I'm not, he exclaimed. It was Pearl. She insisted on cutting down the guest list, and you agreed. I finished for him again. It was your choice, Louis. Don't put the responsibility on your wife. He lowered his head, and for a moment I thought I saw the little boy I'd once comforted after falling off his bike or failing at school. But it wasn't that boy anymore. This was a grown man who had made his choices and had to live with the consequences. I can fix this, he said, raising a pleading gaze to me. We can start over. I'll talk to Pearl. Explain to her how important you are to me. We'll see each other more often, have lunch together, spend holidays together. Because you need a home now? I asked him straight out. No. He looked genuinely indignant. Because you're my mother, and I love you. This has nothing to do with the house. I looked at him with a long, scrutinizing stare. Perhaps a part of him really believed what he was saying. Maybe he'd even convinced himself that his sudden desire for a relationship had nothing to do with the possibility of valuable real estate, but I couldn't believe that lie anymore. Louis, I said finally, and my voice was quiet but firm. You didn't just lose your house. You lost your mother. From now on, you have neither. He stared at me with wide-open eyes, and the color slowly drained from his face until it was almost dead pale. What do you mean? He whispered. I mean that our relationship is over, I explained calmly. You've made it clear that I'm not an important part of your life, and I've accepted that. Now you have to accept my choice to move on without you. But, you can't just give up your own son, he mumbled, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why not? I asked with a sad smile. You gave up your mother for a woman you've known for less than 2 years. Why can't I do the same? Give up a son who's long since ceased to be a part of my life. Louis jumped to his feet, his face contorted with anger and shock. It's not fair. You can't compare. It was just a wedding one day. And you're talking about breaking it off forever. Didn't you break it off first? I asked calmly. By excluding me from the most important day of your life, you showed me what place I hold in your heart, 0. And I just accept that as a fact. He stood in front of me, opening and closing his mouth like a beached fish. Then suddenly he knelt down and grabbed my hands. Please, Mom. His voice shook. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I know it now. Please give me a chance to make it right. I'll do anything. I gently released my hands from his grip. Stand up, Louis, I said softly. You're humiliating yourself, and it won't help. My decision has been made. Is this about the house? He exclaimed, rising to his feet. If it's about the house, forget it. I don't want it. I don't want your presence. I want you. No, Louis. I shook my head. You need the idea of a mother, someone who will always be there for you, no matter what you do, no matter how you treat her. But I'm not that woman anymore. I deserve respect and love, and you're incapable of giving me either. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. Maybe he did. Maybe he'd never really seen the real me, a woman with dignity and boundaries that couldn't be crossed with impunity. I think you should go, I said, standing up. You have your honeymoon ahead of you, don't you? Mom, please. He took a step toward me, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. Don't do this, don't ruin our family. Family? I grinned bitterly. We don't have a family, Louis. We haven't for a long time. We're just two people bound by biology and shared memories. But that's not enough for a real relationship. They require mutual respect and caring, and we don't have that. He stood in the middle of my living room looking lost and small despite his height and age. Part of me wanted to take pity on him, to tell him it would be okay, that we could try again. But I knew that would be a lie, and I was tired of lying, to myself and to him. Goodbye, Louis, I said firmly. I wish you a happy marriage. He stared at me for a few seconds longer, as if he couldn't believe it was over. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door loudly. I was left standing in the middle of the living room, feeling a strange lightness mixed with deep sadness. I had just lost my son, or maybe I had finally recognized that I had lost him a long time ago. But at the same time, I had found myself. And it was the first step toward a new life in which I would no longer be a victim of other people's decisions and desires. It had been 3 days since Louis had left, and all that time my phone had been ringing off the hook. First, it was him calling. I didn't answer. Then Pearl started calling, and I ignored her calls too. Even a few mutual acquaintances tried to contact me, obviously taught by the young couple to influence me. On the 4th day, I changed my phone number. It was a drastic decision, but I felt I needed a clean slate. Besides, everyone I really wanted to keep in touch with had gotten my new number. Hazel, a few coworkers, a couple of old friends. That morning, disconnecting my old phone felt weird, like I'd dropped a heavy backpack I'd been lugging around for years. I made a strong cup of coffee, sat by the window, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself think not about Louis, not about his problems or his attitude toward me, but about my future. What do you want, Ruth? I asked myself out loud. What do you really want for yourself? This simple question stumped me. I had become so accustomed to prioritizing the desires of others, first my parents, then my husband, then my son, that I had almost forgotten how to listen to my own desires. Looking out the window at my manicured garden, I began to make a mental list. I wanted to travel, not necessarily far, but at least to see those places within a few hours' drive that I kept putting off going to. I wanted to take up photography, an old hobby abandoned when Louis was born. I wanted to read more books, maybe join a book club, and I definitely wanted to get rid of the inherited house, which had become a symbol of dashed hopes and betrayal. With that thought in mind, I picked up my new cell phone and called Oliver Pratt to inquire about the possibility of putting the house on the market as soon as possible. Give me a couple days to get the paperwork ready, Oliver said after I explained the situation. And you should contact a realtor. I can recommend Caroline Hart. She's been in real estate in Waukee for 15 years and knows the market better than anyone. I thanked him and wrote down Caroline's number. Before calling her, I decided to check the house again, to make sure everything was in order before showing it to potential buyers. As I drove up Elm Street, I immediately noticed a familiar car parked outside the house. Louis's dark blue Audi. I felt irritated. What was he doing here? How did he even get in? I remembered that I'd given him a spare key a long time ago in case I lost mine. Apparently, he'd decided to use it to… what? To check out the house he was hoping to get? Or maybe ambush me to talk to me, knowing I wasn't answering his calls. I parked a little farther down the street and sat for a few minutes, wondering if I should even get out of the car. Then I resolutely opened the door. This was my house, and I wasn't going to let Louis or anyone else make me feel like an intruder on my property. As I approached the front door, I heard voices inside. Not one Louis voice, but two. His and a female voice that I recognized immediately. Pearl. They were clearly arguing, and judging by the intonation, it was a heated argument. I took out my key and quietly opened the door. The voices came from the living room, and they were so engrossed in their argument that they didn't hear me enter. I don't understand why you don't just apologize to her properly, Louis said. Admit it was your idea not to invite her to the wedding. Maybe then she'll soften up. Oh, so now it's my fault? Pearl's voice was ringing with indignation. You're a grown man, Lewis. No one forced you to agree to this. You made your own decision, and now you're trying to blame it on me because your mommy was offended and disinherited you. It's not about the inheritance, Lewis exclaimed. But even through the closed living room door, I could hear the falseness in his voice. It's that my mother refuses to communicate with me forever, Pearl. Do you realize what that means? Oh, please, Pearl snorted. She's just making drama to make you feel guilty. Classic manipulation. Give her some time to cool off and she'll come crawling back begging for attention. Mothers do it all the time. I felt the color of anger flood my face. This woman, who'd only known me for a year and seen me a dozen times, had the nerve to judge my character and motives. And what was worse, my own son seemed to half believe her. I don't know, Pearl. Lewis's voice sounded uncertain. You didn't see her face when she said it was over. She was different, like she'd really put a stop to it. I stood in the hallway, listening to this woman systematically vilify me in my son's eyes, rewriting our history, turning my love and care into control and criticism. And the worst part was that Lewis didn't mind. He didn't defend me, didn't tell me it wasn't like that. Okay, but what about home? He asked after a pause. You can see how spacious it is. It's perfect for a family, and the neighborhood's great. It's not a bad house, Pearl admitted reluctantly, but it needs a complete remodel. The wallpaper, the furniture, it's all so old-fashioned. And the smell. It smells old, Lewis. We can change it, he insisted. Renovate, furnish it in our own way. With what money? Pearl asked sharply. The wedding has drained us dry. And don't forget, we're still paying the loan on your car. There was a pause, and then Lewis said quietly, Maybe Mom can help with the repairs. If we make up. I'd heard enough. Pushing open the living room door, I stepped inside, taking them both by surprise. They stared at me wide-eyed, like children caught stealing cookies. Mom! Lewis jumped to his feet. Did you hear everything? Enough, I answered calmly. And I'd like you both out of my house immediately. Mrs. Bramble. Pearl stood up too, instantly putting a mask of polite concern on her face. We were just worried about you. You weren't answering your cell phone, and you thought you could come to my house uninvited and discuss how to manipulate me into getting this house and the money to fix it up? I looked her right in the eye. You were wrong. Mom, please. Lewis took a step toward me. We were really worried, and I wanted to apologize in person. I don't want to hear any more lies, Lewis. You've both made it clear how you feel about me and our relationship. And you know what? I'm grateful for your honesty. It's helped me make a final decision. I'm selling this house. What? Lewis's face widened in shock. To whom? To anyone but you, I said. Now please leave and give me back my keys. They left, slamming the door so hard that the old window panes rattled in their frames. I was left standing in the middle of the living room, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Something was finally over, but something new was just beginning. I had kept my word. The next day I contacted Caroline Hart and the house was listed for sale. The listing went online very quickly, and to my surprise, the interest in the house was overwhelming. 10 showings were organized in the first week, and soon there were offers from potential buyers. I accepted an offer from the Prescott couple, a pleasant middle-aged couple from Portland who, according to Caroline, fell in love with the house at first sight. The deal was finalized quickly thanks to the Prescotts having cash on hand and not needing a mortgage. Of course, news of the house sale quickly spread throughout Waukee. Lewis reacted by sending a formal letter from a lawyer claiming he was entitled to a portion of the proceeds because the house was a family legacy. Oliver Pratt assured me that these claims had no legal basis and responded accordingly. Freed from the burden of the inherited house and the memories associated with it, I was able to focus on my new life. I enrolled in a photography class at a local community center where our instructor was Vincent Reed, a professional photographer with a wealth of experience. Every photograph is a story, he said at the first class, and your job as a photographer is to decide what story you want to tell. I bought a good DSLR camera and plunged headlong into my new hobby. Photography made me look at the world with a fresh eye, notice details and beauty in ordinary things. I met some interesting people on the course, especially Martha King, a widow about my age who, like me, was looking for new hobbies after losing her husband. In addition to photography, I started traveling more, day trips to neighboring towns, visiting museums, parks, historical sites. Sometimes I traveled alone, sometimes with Hazel or Martha. Each such trip was a little adventure, discovering something new. I also joined a book club at the local library, where once a month we would discuss the books we had read. It was an opportunity to get back to reading, which I had always loved, and to meet new people and broaden my horizons. One day, about 2 months after selling the house, I ran into Pearl at the Walkie Mart supermarket. I was picking out fruit when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mrs. Bramble? What an unexpected meeting. I turned around and saw my former sister-in-law pushing a grocery cart in front of me. She looked as impeccable as ever-perfect hair, flawless makeup, stylish clothes. But something in her eyes was different. Some kind of tension I hadn't noticed before. "Hello, Pearl." I gave her a polite but reserved nod. "How are you?" she asked with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. "Louis and I have been so worried about you. You've been completely out of sight." "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, putting the apples in my basket. "Just busy with my life." "Yeah, we heard you sold the house," she said casually, but I could hear the resentment in her voice. Louis was very upset. It was his grandparents' house after all. "A house he planned to sell immediately if he got it," I remarked calmly. Pearl blushed slightly, but quickly pulled herself together. "It was a hasty decision. We were actually thinking about living there, especially now that—" She paused, as if hinting at something important. Now? I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Well, I didn't want to speak ahead of time, but Pearl put her hand on her belly in a distinctive gesture. "We're expecting a baby. You're going to be a grandmother soon, Mrs. Bramble." I froze for a moment. A baby, my grandson or granddaughter. At another time, under other circumstances, this news would have made me jump for joy. Now I felt only a vague sadness at the thought that I would probably never know this child. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "I'm sure you'll be good parents." "Thank you." Pearl seemed surprised by my restrained reaction. "We had hoped you would be a part of the child's life. Family's very important, you know." "Yes, family is important," I agreed. "That's why I was so upset when you excluded me from it." "It was a misunderstanding," Pearl said quickly. "Louis and I both regret it, and we'd like to make it right. Maybe you could come over for dinner next week. Talk things over, make a fresh start." I looked at her carefully, trying to figure out what was behind this sudden desire to reconcile. Was it a sincere attempt to mend the relationship for the sake of the baby's future? Or was it just another manipulation? "You know, Pearl," I said finally, "I appreciate the invitation, but I think we all need time to really figure out what we want from each other. Real relationships are built on respect and sincerity, not commitment or profit." "What are you talking about?" Her smile became strained. "We just want you back in the family. Louis misses you, and the baby needs a grandmother." "The baby needs people who truly love him," I corrected her gently. "And I'm sure he'll have plenty of those people. As for me, I'm open to a conversation when I feel it will be honest on both sides." Pearl looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. "You're making this too complicated," she said. Louis apologized. "I apologize. What more do you want?" "I want you both to realize that I'm not a toy that you can throw away when you get tired of it and take out again when you want to play," I replied calmly. "I have feelings, dignity, and a life of my own. It's amazing how fast a year can go by when you're not counting the days or waiting for a call from someone who doesn't want to hear from you." In the 12 months since my conversation with Pearl in the supermarket, my life had changed so much that sometimes I didn't recognize myself. Mornings in my house no longer began with the usual alarm and checking the phone, but with a cup of coffee on the veranda, watching the birds in the garden, and planning a day full of enjoyable activities. I no longer worked at the tax office. After a 30-year career, I finally allowed myself to take a well-deserved vacation. The money from the sale of my inherited house, plus my pension, ensured that I could live comfortably without having to skimp on the little things. The time I freed up, I devoted to my new hobbies. Photography turned from a hobby into a real passion. I continued to take courses with Vincent Reed, but now at an advanced level. My collection of images grew. Nature in different seasons, cityscapes, architectural details of old walkie buildings, portraits of friends. Vincent often praised my work, saying that I had an eye and that my photographs had a warmth and attention to detail. "You have a gift for seeing beauty in the ordinary, Ruth," he once said as he was looking at my pictures of an old water tower on the outskirts of town. "Most people would have passed it by without even looking at it. But you not only noticed it, you were able to show its character, its history." His words meant more to me than any compliments I'd heard in years, because they were about what I had created on my own, without regard for anyone else's expectations or approval. In March, as winter finally receded and the first timid flowers began to break through the ground, Vincent announced that the City Gallery had agreed to hold an exhibition of his students' work. "It will be in early May," he said, looking us over. "Everyone will have the opportunity to submit 3 or 4 of their best works. So choose carefully and get ready for your debut in the art world." I chose 4 pictures: a sunrise over Miller Lake, where the fog swirled over the water, creating an almost mystical atmosphere; an old wooden boat abandoned on the shore, with chipped paint and the grain of the wood showing through; a portrait of Martha taken in the soft light of sunset, when she wasn't posing, but just gazing off into the distance with a wistful smile; and finally, my favorite picture: an old tree in the park, its roots protruding from the ground as if it were an old tree, protruding from the ground as if trying to tell a story. Vincent approved of my choice, especially the last picture. "There's something deeply personal," he said. "It's like you're talking about yourself through that tree." Perhaps he was right. This tree, which had weathered many storms but still stood upright with its crown proudly raised, did remind me of my own journey. The opening of the exhibit was scheduled for May 4th. I was as nervous as a schoolgirl before her first performance. What if no one liked my work? What if I made a fool of myself in front of the whole town? Hazel, who was supposed to go to the opening with me, was suddenly sick. A bad cold had left her bedridden. Martha had gone to her daughter's house in Portland to help with her newborn grandson. So I had to go alone, overcoming the growing anxiety. The Lighthouse Gallery was in a restored historic building in downtown Waukee. It had once been a warehouse, but now the bright space with high ceilings and large windows was perfect for exhibitions. I arrived half an hour before the official opening so that I could prepare myself and see what my work looked like in the gallery lighting. Vincent met me at the entrance, elegant in a dark suit, not at all like the casual man in jeans and a sweater who had led our classes. "Ruth!" He gave me a welcoming hug. "I'm so glad you came early. Come on, I'll show you where your work is displayed." My photographs were hung in a small alcove, a little out of the mainstream, but with perfect lighting that emphasized the play of light and shadow in the pictures. Seeing them on the gallery wall, I suddenly felt proud. It was so different from my old self, to be proud of myself, of my accomplishments, without minimizing their importance. "They're beautiful, Ruth," Vincent said, standing beside me. "I told the curator that you have a special way of looking at the world." She agreed. Gradually, the gallery began to fill with people. Other students from the photography course came in, local art lovers, a few journalists from the city's newspaper. I stood a little apart, watching as visitors moved from one work to another, stopping, discussing, making notes in the exhibition catalogs. They lingered near my photographs, too. I heard scraps of comments. "What an interesting angle. Look how the light plays on the water. There is so much life in this portrait." Each word of approval was like a small victory, like confirmation that I was on the right track. At one point, I noticed a man who had been standing in front of my picture of the tree longer than the others. He was tall, gray-haired, with a straight back and an attentive gaze. Something about his posture, the way he tilted his head as he studied the photo, caught my attention. He wasn't just looking, he was actually seeing what I was trying to show him. "Is this your work?" he asked suddenly, turning and catching my gaze. I was a little embarrassed, realizing that I'd been watching him too openly. "Yes," I answered, stepping closer. "Mine. Very nice," he said with a slight nod. "Especially the one with the tree. It has a depth." History. Thank you. I felt my cheeks warm at the sincere compliment. Owen Burke. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Ruth Bramble, I said, shaking his hand, dry, warm, with the calluses of a man who worked hard with his hands. How long have you been a photographer, Ruth? No, a little over a year. And before that, I hesitated, not knowing how to explain that most of my life had been spent worrying about others, leaving no time for my own hobbies. Before that, you were too busy living your life to document it? He suggested with an understanding smile. I laughed. Something like that. And you? Are you a photographer? No. Owen shook his head. I'm a carpenter. I work with wood, make custom furniture. But I've always appreciated a good photograph, especially when it shows the essence of things, not just their outer shell. We got to talking. Owen, as it turned out, was also a widower. His wife had died of cancer 5 years ago. He had 2 grown children who lived in other cities but visited him regularly. He moved to Waukee 3 years ago when he got a big job restoring furniture at the local library and decided to stay, loving the quiet rhythm of small-town life. People say hello on the streets here, he said. They know each other by name. In the big city, I felt invisible. I knew what he was talking about. Waukee, with all its false gossip, conservatism, a certain provincialism, was still a place where a man couldn't just disappear without a trace. Here, someone would be sure to notice your absence, ask if you were all right. When the official part of the opening was over, Owen suggested that we continue our conversation in the cafe opposite the gallery. I agreed, feeling an unusual excitement, not fear or anxiety, but the pleasant anticipation of a new friendship. The Morning Star Cafe was quiet and cozy. We ordered coffee and blueberry pie, which Owen said was the best in town. So, Ruth Bramble, he said as the waitress stepped away, tell me more about yourself. What led you to the picture in the... I apologize if I'm being too direct, but at an age when most people are already firmly entrenched in their habits? I smiled at his wording. You're right. Most people don't start new hobbies by the time they're 67, I agreed. But let's just say I went through some changes in my life that made me see the world in a new way. And photography became a way to capture that new perspective. I didn't go into detail about Louis, about the wedding, about the house. The story no longer defined me, no longer was the center of my universe. It had become just one of many chapters in my life, and not the most interesting. Owen seemed to understand my reticence and didn't push for details. Instead, he talked about his work, how he loves to feel the texture of the wood under his fingers, how each piece has its own character and requires a special approach. Wood is alive, even when it's already cut, he said with a twinkle in his eye. It breathes, it moves, it changes over time. A good carpenter must respect that character, work with it, not against it. I listened, mesmerized by his passion for his craft. There was something deeply appealing about a man who so genuinely loved his work, who saw beauty and meaning in what others might consider just a job. We sat in the cafe until closing time, moving from one topic to another: books, music, traveling, childhood memories. When we finally went outside, it was already dark and the cool spring wind made me shiver. Let me walk you home, Owen said. It's getting late. Thanks, I've got the car, I said. But it would be nice if you could walk with me to the parking lot. We exchanged phone numbers on the way to the parking lot, and Owen asked if I would like to visit his workshop sometime. I'd love to show you how furniture is made, he said. Maybe it would inspire you to take more pictures. I would love to, I replied sincerely. We shook hands, and for a moment his fingers lingered in mine a little longer than a simple gesture of courtesy required. I felt a slight tingling sensation, as if an electric current had passed between us. See you later, Ruth, he said with a smile that made the wrinkles gather around his eyes. See you, Owen, I said, getting into the car. All the way home, I couldn't stop smiling. At my age, new acquaintances rarely cause such excitement, such anticipation. There was something almost teenage about the way I replayed our conversation in my head, remembering the details of his face, the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his gaze. At home, getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror and was surprised at how I looked. Cheeks slightly pink, eyes glistening, wrinkles around my mouth from the smile that never left my face. I looked alive, real. myself. The next morning, I was awakened by a phone call. I expected to hear Hazel, who had promised a call to see how the exhibition had gone, but instead I heard the mailman's voice. Mrs. Bramble, it's Jeremy from the post office. I have a registered letter for you. Needs a signature. Will you be able to come in today? I promised to come by this afternoon and hung up, wondering who could have sent me a registered letter. Bills and official notices came by regular mail, but friends preferred to call or email. I got the answer in the afternoon when Jeremy handed me a stamped envelope from Stone Porter and Associates, a law firm from a neighboring town. Inside was a letter from Lewis written on official letterhead. Dear Mom, it began, and those two words already gave me mixed feelings. How long had it been since he had called me that in conversation? I'm writing to let you know that on April 23rd, Pearl and I had a son. We named him Noah Howard Bramble after Daddy. He is healthy, weighs 3 pounds 400 grams, and, as the doctors say, is developing normally. I know our relationship is in a difficult stage, but I think it is right to inform you of the birth of our grandson. If you would like to see him, we will not object to your visit. I would also like to mention that our financial circumstances have changed somewhat due to the birth of the baby. Pearl had to leave her job, and now we're living on my salary alone. If you would be able to help us in this difficult time, we would appreciate it. In particular, we need a new car as mine is becoming unreliable, and with a child it is dangerous. Respectfully, Lewis. I reread the letter several times, trying to make sense of the feelings it evoked in me. Joy at the news of my grandson's birth. Yes, there was joy. Despite everything that had happened between Lewis and me, a new life always remains a miracle worthy of celebration. But at the same time, I felt deeply disappointed by the tone of the letter, by its obvious purpose. It wasn't an attempt to build a relationship or a sincere desire for me to meet my grandson. It was a barely disguised request for money, covered by a thin layer of family obligations. If you'd like to see him, we wouldn't mind. Not we'd love to. Not, we want you to be a part of his life, but merely a lack of active resistance. And then, almost in the next paragraph, a hint of financial hardship and a direct request for help. I folded the letter and tucked it away in my bag. I needed time to think about my response. I didn't want to act on emotion, whether it was resentment or a false sense of duty. At home, I called Hazel and told her about the letter. What are you going to do? She asked after a long pause. I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to send them away with their requests. The other part of me wants to remind them that it's not the child's fault what the parents do. That's true, Hazel agreed. But you don't have to buy them a car to be a good grandmother. Of course not, I sighed. I just want to do the right thing by not letting them use me again. Then do what feels right for you, Hazel advised. Not out of obligation or guilt, but out of true desire. I sat at my desk for a long time that night, trying to write my answer. I started and tore up the draft several times until I finally found the words that accurately expressed my feelings. The next day, I sent a simple card of congratulations and a small check note for a car, but for baby items, clearly stating that the money was for the baby's needs only. To the card, I enclosed a short letter. Dear Lewis, congratulations to you and Pearl on the birth of your son. The birth of a child is always a joy and the beginning of a new chapter in life. I hope Noah grows up healthy and happy. Enclosed is a small gift for his needs. This does not mean that I am ready to go back to the old relationship or be a source of financial support for your family. We both know what happened between us, and I don't see a sincere desire on your part to change the situation. I am open to getting to know my grandson, but on my terms and without manipulation. If you really want me to be a part of Noah's life, we can discuss how to do that while respecting each other's boundaries. As for your request for help buying a car, I have to say no. You're a grown man, Lewis, and you need to take responsibility for your family. I'm sure you're up to the challenge. Best wishes, Mom. As I sent the letter, I was relieved. I hadn't slammed the door completely shut, leaving the door open for a real healthy relationship, but I hadn't let myself be dragged into old toxic patterns either. It was a small act of self-worth, one more step toward complete freedom from the past. Over the following weeks, I received no response from Lewis. No, thanks for the gift, no reaction to my offer to discuss the terms of our future contact. This silence spoke for itself, confirming my suspicions about the true purpose of his letter, but I didn't let it cloud my life. Instead of dwelling on the lack of response, I focused on the relationships that truly brought me joy, especially on my growing friendship with Owen. We saw each other several times after the exhibition. I visited his studio. He came to my house for dinner. We went to a concert together at a local school where the brass band was playing. Each meeting strengthened our bond. Each conversation revealed new shared interests and values. Owen was attentive but not intrusive, caring but respectful of my independence. He knew how to really listen, not just wait for his turn to speak. And most importantly, with him, I felt free to be myself, without having to conform to someone else's expectations or play a prescribed role. In early June, as summer was taking hold, Owen suggested that we take a trip to the coast together. "There's this little town, Mystic Bay," he said. "It's only 3 hours from here. An old lighthouse, beautiful sunsets, some good restaurants. I thought it might be a good place for photography and a break from the everyday." I hesitated. Taking an overnight trip together was a significant step, a hint that our relationship was developing beyond simple friendship. "I've booked 2 private rooms in a small guest house," he added, noticing my confusion. "No pressure, Ruth. Just 2 friends exploring a new place together." His sensitivity touched me. In a world where many men his age would expect immediate intimacy, Owen was giving me space and time to make my own decisions. "I'd like to go," I said, and it was true. "When are you thinking of going?" "Next weekend?" he suggested. "If it's convenient for you?" I nodded, feeling a warm anticipation welling up inside me. Not just the thought of a trip to the coast, but the realization that I had someone in my life I wanted to share moments like this with. We agreed on the details. Owen would pick me up Saturday morning. We'd spend the day exploring around Mystic Bay, spend the night at the guest house, and return Sunday night. A simple plan, nothing extraordinary. But for me, it was an adventure I was looking forward to. When Owen left, I remained seated on the veranda, watching the last rays of sunlight color the garden in golden hues. My thoughts flowed quietly, without the usual anxiety or regret about the past. I thought about the upcoming trip, the new pictures I would take, the conversations I would have with Owen over the sound of the waves. I thought about how my life has changed over the past year. From a woman clinging to a toxic relationship with her son, to a person who has found her own voice, her own joy, her own path. Of course, there have been losses. I will probably never know my grandson the way I would have dreamed. I will never regain the close relationship with Louis that I remembered from his childhood. But instead, I found myself, my strength, my capacity for happiness independent of the approval of others. And maybe one day, when Noah is older, when Louis truly understands what he has lost, we can find a new way to be a family. Not out of obligation or habit, but out of true love and respect. But even if that didn't happen, I knew I'd be okay. More than okay. I would be living a full, fulfilling life with people who appreciated me for who I was. With that thought in mind, I got up and walked into the house to start preparing for my trip. A new chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was ready to turn the page with a light heart and an open mind.